And welcome back to Chicago Bulls Insider. Today we are doing player grades. We're talking about Julian Phillips, Dalen Terry, Talen Horton-Tucker. We're going to be grading their season. And we're also going to be talking about what we can expect from these players next season. And so before we go ahead and jump into it, I first want to remind you to slam dunk on that subscribe button, just like Modest Buzelis slam dunks in games. And so in exchange for slamming on that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Chicago Bulls. So make sure you slam on that subscribe button, you hit the like button, and you join the Chicago Bulls Insider family as we talk nothing but Chicago Bulls basketball daily. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the content for today. And let's start with Julian Phillips. And so before we go ahead, jump into the numbers and look at his season grade, let's start with the impact that Julian Phillips had and the pluses out of his season. And so I think that the first key takeaway from Julian Phillips was his display of athleticism. I thought that his athleticism on the offensive end and the defensive end, I thought it was really good, especially when he really had it going in his better games this season. And so when we talk about what he did offensively with his athleticism, I thought that he did a terrific job as far as being a slasher. I thought he was great as far as following up misses, whether it was Josh Giddey, Coby White, or anybody else that got to the lane. Sometimes he was able to get tip dunks. I thought that he showed his ability to be an athletic wing, just running down the court in the fast break, and then he's there for the spectacular dunk that way. So I thought that that was a key aspect. And I thought, too, another thing that he showed was the ability to be a slasher. Okay, so being able to put the basketball on the deck and get to the rim. He showed little flashes of that, but it was good to see that. Next, I think defensively with his athleticism, you see a player that can really be an irritant. It can use his length, kind of get into the passing lanes, make it difficult on a player trying to shoot a jump shot. And I just think with Julian Phillips, if he gets to his ceiling, then I'm looking at a player that could maybe become like one of the Thompsons. And so I'm talking about Azor Thompson that plays for the Detroit Pistons, and then Amen Thompson that plays for the Rockets. And so I'm not saying that he's going to be them, but I think he could be a player like them, which would be huge for the Chicago Bulls, especially if you need him to come off the bench or to give you a spot start. So next up, I think the next thing with Julian Phillips that I really love this season is that there was more trust, because Billy Donovan did start Julian Phillips, so he gave him some more chances that way, and that's good to see, especially being your second year in the league, that you get a chance to get out there and start. So there's some trust from Billy Donovan. And then next, I think his three-point shooting, we're going to take a look at that. And so the percentages weren't great, but I think that his confidence and his willingness to take the three ball, that was good, because if you wanted to, get him in the corner and let him take the three-point shot, like, he would definitely make teams pay sometimes there. And I think that that's something that he's going to grow into a little bit more. And look, if he's going to be a 3-and-D player for the Chicago Bulls, perfectly fine. Like I said, if he becomes like one of the Thompson brothers, that would be terrific for, a guy that can just get out, use his athleticism, knock down the corner three-point shot, and lock down on the defensive end. That would be great for us here in Chicago if he can grow to that. And so I thought he showed some flashes. The numbers are not going to show you a player that took an amazing jump, but if you looked at the games, I think that you definitely see that. And so now let's go ahead and take a look at the numbers. And, you can just see just exactly what Julian Phillips did here for the season. And so bringing that up right now. And so let's start here with the scoring for Julian Phillips and first. And so I think that when you look at the scoring, you see that it wasn't a huge increase for him. 3.8 points is what he's averaging for his career, but he went up to 4.6 points this year. So a couple points increased there. Then when you look at the steals, this is what we were talking about defensively, how he showed that length on the defensive end and being an irritant. That went up a little bit. His block shots went up slightly to 0.3 there. The assist, that went up because I think he was, dribbling the basketball a little bit more. So not just standing in the corner, showing his slashing ability. So 0.5 there. And then his free throw percentage, that was a big time jump. So 78.9%. That's huge, especially for a player that uses his athleticism. You want to have that type of confidence to go in there, and make teams pay if you get fouled. So we love that. Next, when you look at his 3-point percentage, look, we talked about how he would knock down the corner 3-point shot. And so you're seeing right here, he goes to 32.7%. It wasn't a huge increase, but like I said, if you watch the games, it would be timely 3-point shots, and his shot definitely looks like he's been working on it. He certainly looks like he's confident. So I'm looking to see what he's going to do here in this next season with the Chicago Bulls. And then next, his field goal percentage. So you love to see that it went from 41.6 up to 44.6. And so that is great anytime you see an increase. And then right here, this is huge. When we're talking about the trust factor, look, 5 games started. Look at his minutes. He went from 8.1 minutes up to 14.2 and 79 games played. And so, like I said, there's nothing that just it jumps off as a wow factor for you, but you see some growth. And that's all you want when you're trying to build up a young team. And so, I think with Julian Phillips, he takes this year. He's learned this offense. He's going to come back. Josh Giddey and these guys are going to be even more confident. And so I think that he's going to see that there's going to be some chances for him to take off in this next season. And so because of that, I gave him a C. I thought it was an average season for him. He didn't take an amazing jump, but I think it was solid for the most part. And like I said, that's just what you want from Julian Phillips. You hope that next season for him, it turns into either a B- or an A. That would be ideal for us. And I just think that his season outlook for next season, it's going to be a player that if somebody gets injured, I think that you're going to see him start some more games. That's first and foremost for next season. I want to see him get into the starting lineup a little bit more. But next, I want to see his minutes go up. I want to see a player go from not just playing 14 minutes a game, but I would like to see him get to 20 minutes a game. That would be ideal, for this next season coming up, but we'll see what happens. And so the next player that I want to go ahead and jump into is going to be Dalen Terry. And so let's talk about Dalen Terry, his impact before we go ahead and jump into just, his season grade or whatnot. And so with Dalen Terry, I think that it's almost similar to what Julian Phillips did. So I think defense is where we'll start with him. I think that he showed that he could definitely use his athleticism and be an irritant, much like Julian Phillips. I think that he's shown that he can use his length, get steals that way. I remember an incredible play that he had in Philadelphia where he got the steal in the inbounds pass and dunked it. That was great to see. It was towards the end of the season. And so Dalen Terry, much like Julian Phillips, he showed signs. And then I think back to the West Coast trip later in the year for the Chicago Bulls. That was right before Josh Giddey hit that half-court shot when we went back home to Chicago. And I just loved what Dalen Terry was showing us over that West Coast trip because he was getting double figures. He was knocking down 3-point shots. He was playing with a ton of juice and a ton of confidence. And I just think with Dalen Terry, much like Julian Phillips, you got to give these guys some more runs. And it's not about them necessarily growing into starters. It's can you throw them out there to be a 3-and-D? Can they be a defensive stopper? Can they be players that can be really effective for your team and you don't have to run a play for them? And so I think that we saw some flashes from Dalen Terry. Obviously, we want to see some more of that. And so we're going to take a look at the numbers here in the moment. But next up for him, I think a big thing was confidence. Like I thought that his confidence was something that I was very impressed with. I think that when it came down to him going out to shoot the basketball, I'd say much like Julian Phillips, he was not afraid to let it fly, even if, the results weren't that good. And so we love that with him. And then next, I think the athleticism for him. I think that there were times where he made some nice plays, either in transition or he made some nice like reverse layups and stuff like that. So Dalen Terry, much like I said, like with Julian Phillips, it's very similar with what we saw, from him. And so let's go ahead now and just look at the stats as we can bring that up and see. You'll see that the numbers, not a huge jump. All right. So he goes from 2.2 his first year, 3.1 last season to 4.5. And so again, a slight increase. But then you see that the steals slightly up to 0.6 there. So we always like to see that. The block shots were down slightly. The assists were down slightly too to 1.3, rebounding as well. His free throw percentage, much like Julian Phillips, he increased in that department. So that's great to know, especially being a slasher where you're going to get fouled. And if you're just kind of hanging around the rim, you can expect that you're going to get some contact. So you got to make defenses pay there. And then the big thing is the 3-point percentage, right? So this is his third season in, and we're seeing that he went from 23% up to 35.6%. That is a very good increase. And if you're going to be a 3-and-D player, you're going to certainly have to make defenses pay. So we saw some growth there. And then the field goal percentage slightly up. He went from 43.9 to 44.8. And so that is a good thing too. And you see that he started 5 games and he played in 73. And so I believe he had some calf issues that he was dealing with towards the end of the season. And so, with Dalen Terry, I'm giving him a C minus for me, and only because he's been in the league a little bit longer than Julian Phillips, but still, I think a solid season. And I think it's more so he's trending upward towards, a C plus and getting to that next grade. But for me, I wanted to see a little bit more growth this season. But don't get me wrong, I definitely was impressed with some of the things that I saw. I think between him and Julian Phillips, they've really got to put it in, because I think that the Chicago Bulls are going to count on these guys. And I think that AK is investing in them, that they are going to figure it out, because they're going to need them, especially if some of the main guys end up going down, or if they make a major trade like to Lonzo Ball or something like that. These are definitely going to be players that are going to be set to really play some big minutes. And so looking at his minutes, you could see that it went from 11.5 minutes up to 13.5, which is why I don't give him anything lower than a C minus. I think that this comes down to Billy Donovan giving him some more trust. I think he trusts Julian Phillips a little bit more than Dalen Terry. And so next up, let's talk about THT and his season grade. And so first, let's start with the impact with THT. And so with THT, I think the bottom line for him is that THT is a scorer. And that's just the bottom line with that. And that's what THT does, is he gets buckets. And so don't have a problem with that. Defensively, if you were looking for something from THT, it's not going to happen. If you're looking for somebody to be a huge rebounder, that's not going to happen either. So THT is just a straight bucket getter. And I got to give him a ton of credit, man, because when it came down to it and the Chicago Bulls needed him to score some baskets, he would go out and get his baskets. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and look at his numbers. And so you see it definitely declined as far as the points. You see with Utah, he was at 10.1. He went down to 6.5. And understandable. Like I said, the role definitely changed with the Chicago Bulls. If you go back and look at what he did with Utah, he was definitely a little bit more involved with that team. With this one just coming off the bench. And then, like I said, you look at the steals, you don't get very much there, 0.4. He went down in block shots, 0.2 here. Rebounds were down as well. And then you see that his free throw percentage was even down to 73.5. And then you look at his three-point percentage, you got to give him some credit there, because it was actually one of his best three-point shooting percentages at 33.6. And then when you look at the field goal percentage, much better than what he shot at Utah at the 39.6. So he's had a 45.7%. That was one of his better shooting percentages in his career. And then when you look at the minutes, you can see that there's a huge decline. He went from 19 minutes a game down to 12.5 minutes a game with the Chicago Bulls. And so I just think that at the end of the day, Billy Donovan just saw him as a bucket getter and just kind of, look, if there was an emergency and he needed to break the glass, he was going to THT. And so I just think that I'm going to give THT, really, for me, it was a solid C minus for me, because he didn't improve very much. He didn't give you anything else other than scoring, and you knew that coming in. And so that's why I'm going with a C minus for THT. I don't give him anything lower than that. I didn't think he was like the worst for us out there. And so anyway, let me know in the comments what you guys think about the season grade. I think with THT, more than likely, he's probably not going to be back. I'd say the fact that we have, a first round pick coming in, then also to a second round pick, you're going to need the roster space. And then who knows what happens, man, because if the Chicago Bulls are making a trade in this offseason, who knows what's going to go on with Vooch or whatnot, you're going to need that space. And so I think THT, with this expiring contract, he's certainly not going to be back with the Chicago Bulls. And with Dalen Terry and Julian Phillips, look, they've already picked up the player option on Dalen Terry, if I'm not mistaken. And so he's good to go for the 25-26 season. You see what he's making, right around 5.4 million there. And then with Julian Phillips, he is also set to be good here until the 26-27 season. That's where the Chicago Bulls have a club option on him. And so anyway, let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking. Do you feel like that, yes, Julian Phillips is going to play a major role for the Chicago Bulls this upcoming season? Do you feel like that he definitely showed you some flashes to where maybe he could be a pretty good role player for this team? And the same would be the same question for Dalen Terry. Do you feel like that, look, Dalen Terry also showed some good flashes? You do believe that he can be a piece that the Chicago Bulls can depend on off of the bench, maybe make some spot starts for this team, but really be the 3-and-D players that the Chicago Bulls really need? So let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking there. And then lastly, what did you think about THT and his season grade? And do you feel like the Chicago Bulls should look to offer him another contract? Because I strongly think that they should not. But anyway, let me know what you guys are thinking. And as we always say, go Bulls, and I will see you guys on the next one. All right, peace.